The tape dispenser hissed as I pulled a strip for the bottle of vintage wine I had bought for my daughter-in-law. My phone buzzed on the granite countertop. I wiped my hands and picked it up, expecting a time for dinner. Instead, I read the words that stopped my heart. Mom, you paid for our wedding, but don't come to Christmas dinner. I stared at the screen until the sharp edge of the tape sliced right into my thumb. My name is Eleanor Price, and at 67 years old, I have learned that silence in a house is heavy. It settles into the corners of my small bungalow here in the outskirts of Maple Ridge, Colorado, like a fine layer of dust that no amount of cleaning can truly remove. Since my husband died, I have filled that silence with the hum of the refrigerator, the drone of the television news, and the rhythmic click of my knitting needles. But this afternoon was supposed to be different. Today was the day before Christmas Eve, and the silence was vibrating with anticipation. The winter sun was already dipping below the pine trees outside my kitchen window, casting long, cold shadows across the granite countertop. It was freezing outside, the kind of Colorado cold that snaps branches, but inside, my kitchen was warm and smelled of cinnamon and Scotch tape. I was wrapping the final gifts for my son, Mark, his wife, Sophie, and my two beautiful grandchildren. I smoothed a piece of bright red wrapping paper over a box containing a bottle of expensive vintage wine for Sophie. It was a Cabernet she had mentioned once in passing months ago, and I had driven 40 miles to a specialty store just to find it. Next to it sat a pair of hand-knit wool socks for my grandson, Oliver, made with the softest merino yarn I could afford, and a delicate silver hair clip for little Emma, and for Mark. I had found his father's old pocket watch, painstakingly restored to working order. I hummed a carol under my breath, imagining the look on Mark's face when he opened it and saw the engraving on the back. My phone buzzed against the counter, the sound harsh and vibrating through the festive atmosphere I had built in my head. I wiped my hands on my apron and picked it up, expecting a text about the time I should arrive tomorrow, or perhaps a request to bring my famous cranberry sauce. The screen lit up. It was Mark. Mum, you paid for our wedding, but don't come to Christmas dinner. Sophie and I agreed it's just for immediate family now. Please respect that. I read the words once, then twice. The sentence made no sense. It was a collection of English words that I understood individually, but together they formed a language I did not speak. Paid for our wedding. Don't come. Immediate family. My hand started to shake. It was a subtle tremor at first, barely noticeable. Then a violent jerk that travelled up my arm. I reached for the heavy tape dispenser to finish the wine bottle, simply because my body was on autopilot, but my vision blurred. The serrated metal edge of the dispenser sliced deep into the pad of my thumb. I did not feel the pain immediately. I just watched a single drop of bright red blood bead up and fall onto the expensive wrapping paper, ruining the pristine fold I had just made. It must be a joke. I whispered to the empty room, my voice sounding thin, like dry leaves scraping together on a sidewalk. He sent it to the wrong person. Or maybe his phone was stolen. I typed a reply, my fingers slipping on the blood-smeared screen. Mark, is this a joke? I have the gifts ready. 3 dots danced on the screen. He was typing. He was not hacking. He was not joking. It's not a joke. Mum, we just think it's better this way. You always make Sophie feel uncomfortable about the money. You paid for the wedding. Sure. And we appreciate it. but that transaction is done. It doesn't buy you a seat at the table forever. We need space. I stared at the word transaction. I had never mentioned the money. Not once. Not when I signed the second mortgage on this house to pay for their lakeside reception. Not when I ate instant noodles for 6 months to pay off the caterer. I had never asked for a dime back. I had only asked for time. I had interpreted my sacrifice as love. But my son had interpreted it as a business deal, one that had now expired. I looked at the pile of gifts on the table. The wool socks I had spent weeks knitting now looked like rags. The vintage wine looked like vinegar. The pocket watch, ticking softly inside its box, sounded like a time bomb counting down to nothing. These were not gifts anymore. They were evidence of a love that had nowhere to go. They were contraband that I was now forbidden to deliver. The kitchen light seemed to dim, the yellow glow turning sickly against the peeling beige paint of the walls. My thumb throbbed now, a sharp, rhythmic pulse that matched the ache in my chest. I was the banker, the investor, the safety net. I was not the mother. I was not the grandmother. I was just the woman who paid. And now that the bill was settled, I was being discarded like a receipt. The phone buzzed one last time. Please don't show up and cause drama. Just stay home. I did not reply. I did not cry. The tears that had threatened to spill minutes ago receded, sucked back into a dry, hot place deep inside my gut. I looked at the reflection of an old woman in the darkened window, grey hair, bloody thumb, apron slightly askew. She looked pathetic. Then, slowly, I straightened my back. I reached out and took a screenshot of the conversation. Click. Saved. I opened the folder on my phone where I kept photos of my grandchildren and moved the screenshot there. I looked at the contact photo of my smiling son and whispered into the cold air of the kitchen. Mark, you just gave me the last Christmas gift you will ever regret giving. The blood on my thumb had dried to a rusty brown, matching the age spots on the back of my hands. I looked at those hands, really looked at them. For the first time in years, these were hands that had scrubbed floors, changed IV bags, and held the hands of dying strangers at Riverside Haven Clinic for 30 years. They were not soft hands. They were tools I had used to build a life for Mark out of the rubble his father left behind. When my husband died in a construction accident, Mark was only 6. I did not have the luxury of grief. I had a mortgage and a boy who needed new shoes every 3 months. I took the night shift because it paid $1.50 more an hour. I traded my youth for his future. While other women my age were planning vacations or taking pottery classes, I was selling my wedding ring, the only gold I ever owned, to pay for his first semester at Harborfield. I remember the pawnshop broker looking at me with pity when he slid $400 across the glass counter. "It's for tuition," I had told him, my voice trembling but my chin high. "My son is going to be a big man someday." For 3 decades, I did not know what a Christmas morning felt like without exhaustion. I volunteered for every holiday shift so the nurses with husbands and young babies could stay home. "Go on, Sarah," I would say. "Mark understands. He knows I'm working for us." I would come home at 7 in the morning, eyes burning from lack of sleep, just to watch him tear open the gifts I had bought with overtime pay. I wanted him to feel normal. I wanted him to feel rich. "You are going to be the first Price to wear a cap and gown," I whispered to him every night. And he was. He was brilliant. He was handsome. I wore my pride like a medal. Then he brought Sophie home. She was beautiful, sharp, and worked for Veleric Systems. The first time she walked into this kitchen, her eyes did a quick sweep of my linoleum floors and the mismatched mugs in the cabinet. It was a subtle judgment, a quiet sniff of disdain that she masked with a tight smile. "It's quaint," she had said. "Very cozy. Eleanor?" When they announced they wanted to get married at the Silver Bay Resort, I knew they could not afford it. They wanted lakeside views and imported hydrangeas. They were young and broke. I was old and tired. But I was not going to let them start their marriage with debt. I went to the bank and sat across from a loan officer who looked younger than my son. I remember the sound of the pen scratching against the paper as I signed the second mortgage on this house. I was cashing in my retirement. I was risking the roof over my head. My hand shook so hard the signature looked jagged, but my eyes were bright. I thought I was buying their happiness. I never told Mark I had leveraged my home. I wanted him to stand at that altar feeling like a prince, not a debtor. Whatever I did, it worked. Mark landed a job as a senior manager at Northbridge Equity. Money poured into their lives. They moved to a sprawling estate in Cedar Crest, a place with gates and security guards. But as their tax bracket climbed, the distance between us grew. It started with small comments. "Mum, please don't buy the kids' clothes anymore," Mark told me last year, handing back a bag of shirts I had bought at a department store sale. "Your taste is a bit discount. It doesn't fit their style." Then came the requests for silence. "We are having colleagues over tonight," he would say, adjusting his silk tie. "Please, Mom, don't tell that story about how we used to clip coupons to buy pizza. It makes people uncomfortable. It's not who we are anymore." I swallowed it all. I thought this was just the price of his success. But sitting here tonight, looking at the text message that banned me from Christmas, I realized the cruelest paradox of my life. The more money my son made, the cheaper I became to him. I was no longer his mother. I was an embarrassing relic of the poverty he was trying to erase. I was a stain on his pristine, wealthy life. And he had finally decided to scrub me out. I stared at the screen for a long minute before my thumb hovered over the call button. I needed to hear his voice. I needed to hear him say the words, to hear the hesitation that would tell me this was Sophie's idea, not his. I pressed the icon. It rang once, then twice, and then the call was declined. My chest tightened. A moment later, a voice message appeared. I pressed play, holding the phone up to my ear with a trembling hand. "Mom." "Look." Mark's voice filtered through the speaker, sounding tinny and detached, like he was speaking from a boardroom meeting rather than to his mother. "Please don't make this harder than it is. We just want a quiet holiday. Sophie and I decided that Christmas this year is for the nuclear family only. We will see you some other time." The message ended. Nuclear family. The term felt clinical, like he was surgically removing a tumor before I could even process the sting. A text from Sophie arrived. It was polite, perfectly punctuated, and utterly venomous. "Eleanor, we need to set boundaries. You always bring drama and guilt trips. Let's just take a break this year." I lowered the phone to the table. Drama, guilt trips. My mind flashed back to last Christmas. I had not caused a scene. I had barely spoken. I remembered arriving at their mansion, wearing my best sweater, only to be ushered to the small, folding card table in the corner with the grandchildren. While Mark, Sophie, and her parents sat at the long mahogany dining table laughing over crystal glasses of wine, I was wiping mashed potatoes off a toddler's chin. I remembered bringing out my homemade pumpkin pie, the recipe my mother had taught me. Sophie had taken one bite, wrinkled her nose, and pushed the plate away. "It's a bit heavy, isn't it?" she had said, loud enough for the whole table to hear. "Very old-fashioned. We're trying to eat cleaner these days." I had apologized. I had apologized for my pie. I had apologized for existing. And then a sharper, darker memory clawed its way to the surface. It was from 5 years ago, the week before their wedding. I was walking down the hallway of the hotel where we were staying, carrying a bag of favors I had stayed up all night assembling. The door to Sophie's suite was ajar. I heard her laughing on the phone. I know. Sophie's voice had drifted into the hall. "Mark is broke, but at least his mom pays. It is cheaper than a loan. We just have to tolerate her for a few years until we get on our feet." I had frozen in the hallway, clutching the bag of favors to my chest. At the time, I had told myself she was just venting, that she was young and stressed. I told myself that family forgives. But reading her text about boundaries now, that memory sounded different. It did not sound like stress. It sounded like a strategy. I was never a mother to them. I was a wallet. I was a zero-interest loan that they had finally decided to default on. Rage, hot and sudden, flared in my stomach. I began to type a reply to Mark. "Do you remember who paid for that wedding? Do you remember who mortgaged her home so you could look like a king?" I stared at the blinking cursor. Then, I pressed the backspace key, one character at a time. I deleted the message. Arguing with him over text would only prove Sophie right. It would make me the hysterical old woman they wanted me to be. I would not give them that satisfaction. I stood up, my knees popping in the cold kitchen air, and walked to the hallway closet. I reached up to the top shelf and pulled down a heavy, dust-covered plastic bin. I carried it to the kitchen table and cracked the lid open. Inside was the paper trail of my love. I pulled out the bank statements from 10 years ago. I pulled out the mortgage documents for the loan I was still paying off every month. I found the receipts for the wedding venue, the caterer, the florist, the band. The numbers were staggering. $50,000 here, $20,000 there. I looked at the stack of papers, yellowing at the edges. For the last decade, I had worn coats until the elbows rubbed through. I had cut my pills in half to make the prescription last longer. I had kept the heat set to 60 degrees in the winter to save on the electric bill. And in all that time, Mark had never once asked me if I had enough money for groceries. He never asked if I was warm. He only asked if I could babysit, or if I could stay in the background. I ran my finger over my signature on the loan document. If a stranger did this to me, I said aloud to the empty room, I would call the police. Why did I accept it just because we shared DNA? Why was his cruelty permissible just because I had given birth to him? I looked at the phone again. The screen was dark. I did not pick it up. I did not call back. I did not beg. I simply sat there, surrounded by the receipts of my sacrifice, and felt the sadness evaporate, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "You want boundaries." "Mark," I whispered, my voice steady and low. "Okay. Mom is going to show you exactly what a boundary looks like." 2 days after the text message that broke my heart, I received an email that stopped it. It was a Tuesday morning, and the sky was the color of a bruised plum. I was sitting at my computer, paying the electric bill. when a notification popped up from Sophie. The subject line read, Price Family Asset Restructuring, Q1 Strategy. I frowned. Sophie never emailed me. She usually communicated through Mark or not at all. I clicked it open and immediately realized her mistake. The email was addressed to an E. Price at a financial consulting firm, likely a generic email address that was dangerously close to my own. Sophie had trusted the autofill feature too much. I opened the attachment. It was a PDF file titled Long-Term Plan. I scrolled past the colourful graphs about stock portfolios and retirement savings until I reached a section titled Liabilities and Liquidation. My name was the first item on the list. Mother-in-law currently occupies prime asset. The document read, Plan to relocate to Brook Hollow Assisted Living by February. Sell Maple Ridge property to free up capital for vacation home acquisition. My stomach turned over. Brook Hollow was a facility on the other side of the county, known for two things, the smell of industrial disinfectant and the high rate of bed sores among patients. It was a warehouse for the forgotten. Beneath that, a note in bold font made my blood run cold. Action item, secure power of attorney after the holidays. Use the distance created during Christmas to establish dominance and boundaries. Frame the move as a medical necessity. I sat back in my chair, the leather creaking loudly in the silent room. The Christmas rejection was not just cruelty, it was strategy. They were not just cutting me out of dinner. They were preparing to cut me out of my own life. They were devaluing me, turning me into a problem to be solved, an asset to be liquidated. Panic rose in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I went to the fireproof box under my bed and pulled out the deed to my house. I remembered the day, 5 years ago, when Mark had convinced me to refinance. It is for your own good. Mom, he had said, his eyes wide and earnest. If I put my name on the title, we can get you a much lower interest rate. You will save hundreds a month. I had trusted him. I scanned the document now, my eyes straining against the fine print. There it was, a clause regarding partition by sale. As a co-owner, Mark had the legal right to force a sale of the property if he wanted to cash out his share. I grabbed my coat and drove to Nora's house. Nora was 70, a retired legal secretary with hair dyed the colour of pumpkins and a mind like a steel trap. We sat at her kitchen table while she read the documents. The clock on her wall ticked loudly, marking the seconds while my life hung in the balance. Finally, she took off her reading glasses and looked at me with sad, tired eyes. Eleanor, she said softly, they have been planning this for a long time. They prepared this so that the moment they needed cash, you would be the one out on the street. He is my son, I whispered. He wouldn't. He is not your son right now, Nora replied, cutting me off and tapping the paper with a manicured fingernail. Right now, he is a shark, and you are the bait. I went home, but I did not sleep. I sat at my kitchen table while the moon tracked across the sky. The grief I had felt over the Christmas dinner was gone. In its place was a cold, sharp clarity. I was not a mother to them. I was an entry in a ledger. I was a liability. I stood up and walked to the hallway closet again. This time, I did not pull out photos. I pulled out my old accounting books. Mark used to mock these. Mum, get a spreadsheet, he would say, laughing. That handwriting is so quaint. I opened the first book. I found the entry for his first semester of college. $7,400. I found the entry for his first car. $3,200. I found the wedding. $52,000. I found the student loans I had paid off so he could qualify for his first mortgage. $12,000. I traced the numbers with my finger. Every shift I worked. Every vacation I skipped. Every meal I missed so he could eat steak. It was all there. I looked back at the computer screen where the word liability still glowed in the darkness. I closed the ledger with a heavy thud. "Okay, Mark," I said to the empty house. "If you want to treat me like a business transaction, fine. But if you think I am a loss, I am going to show you what a total bankruptcy looks like." I did not go to the glass towers in the financial district, where men in Italian suits charged $500 an hour to tell you what you wanted to hear. Instead, I drove to a red brick building in downtown Maple Ridge that smelled of old paper and stale coffee. I went to see Harold Grant. Harold was 60 years old, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite and a reputation for enjoying a fight. He was known around town as the lawyer you hired when you were tired of being polite. When I first sat down in his cluttered office, Harold looked bored. He leaned back in his creaking chair, tapping a yellow pencil against his desk. "Mrs. Price," he said, his voice gravelly and low. "If this is just a dispute about who cooks the turkey, save your money. Go buy a bottle of gin and wait it out." I did not say a word. I simply reached into my purse and slid the printed email across the desk, the one where my daughter-in-law called me a liability. On top of that, I placed the deed to my house and the ledger I had kept for 30 years. Harold picked up the email. He read it. Then he picked up the deed. The tapping of the pencil stopped. He sat up straight, putting on a pair of reading glasses to inspect the fine print of the co-ownership agreement Mark had tricked me into signing. When he looked up at me, the boredom was gone, replaced by a sharp, predatory focus. "This isn't a family spat," Harold said, tossing the paper back onto the desk. "This is a liquidation strategy. They are stripping you for parts, Mrs. Price, and they have already started the engine. I want to stop them," I said. "We won't just stop them," Harold replied. "We are going to dismantle them, but we need a two-layer plan. First, we shield what you have left. Second, we find out exactly why your son is so desperate for capital that he's willing to sell his mother's roof out from under her." That afternoon, I did something I had not done in 20 years. I walked into the bank and moved my secret emergency fund money I had made investing in small municipal bonds over decades into a new trust account. It was not a fortune, just over $40,000. But it was money Mark did not know existed. I named the trust, signed the papers, and felt a grim satisfaction as I severed his potential access to the last safety net I had. "We need eyes on him," Harold told me later. "I know a woman, Lydia Moore. She used to be a financial reporter before she realized the real stories were the ones people paid to hide. She is 45, expensive, and she doesn't miss a thing." I agreed to hire her. Over the next few days, I began to change. I walked into a salon and told the stylist to cut off the grey bun I had worn since my husband died. I wanted it short, sharp. I went to a boutique and bought a coat that was tailored and structured, not the baggy wool things I usually wore to hide my body. I started walking 3 miles every morning, forcing my lungs to burn, forcing my legs to remember that they were strong. I needed to be ready. When I faced Mark next, I would not be the trembling old woman he expected. but the heart is a stubborn thing. One evening, sitting in Harold's office, I pulled out my phone and looked at the string of cruel texts from Mark. My thumb hovered over the trash icon. I just wanted them gone. I wanted to erase the evidence of his cruelty so I could pretend, just for a moment, that my boy was still the sweet child who used to make me cards with macaroni and glue. Harold's hand shot out and covered mine. "Don't you dare," he said, his voice stern. "You don't erase history, Eleanor. You remember it. Every time you feel weak, every time you want to bake him a pie, you look at those texts. You remember that to him. You are just a line item on a spreadsheet." He was right. I kept the texts. I started practicing my new strength on the world around me. When my neighbour asked if I could watch her 3 unruly children for the weekend for free, a favour I had done a dozen times before, I stood in my doorway and looked her in the eye. "No," I said. "I have plans." She looked shocked, sputtering an apology, but I closed the door. It was a small victory, a flex of a muscle I had let atrophy. The next time I met with Harold, we talked about Christmas. "He thinks you are going to stay home and cry," Harold said, leaning forward. "He thinks he has won the silence. We are going to turn that party into a stage." I nodded, the plan forming clearly in my mind. I went home and stood in front of the full-length mirror in my bedroom. I looked at the woman staring back the new haircut, the set jaw, the eyes that were no longer watery with self-pity, but clear with resolve. "You are not just Mark's mum," I said to my reflection, my voice steady in the quiet room. "You are Eleanor Price, and you are about to teach them exactly what that name means." Lydia Moore did not knock when she entered Harold's office 3 days later. She threw a thick manila folder onto the mahogany desk with a sound that cracked like a gunshot. The air in the room shifted instantly from dusty quiet to the sharp, electric tension of a storm about to break. "Your son isn't just wealthy, Eleanor," Lydia said, pulling a chair out and sitting down with a sigh. "He is a magician. He has been juggling chainsaws, and he is about to drop one." I reached for the folder, but Harold put his hand over it. He looked at Lydia. "Give us the headline first." "Mark is leveraged to the hilt," Lydia said, her voice fast and professional. "He is the face of something called the Green Horizon Fund. It pitches itself as sustainable real estate for the future. He has been raising capital from small-time investors, teachers, retirees, local business owners in neighbouring counties. He uses a very specific story to sell it." Lydia pulled out a tablet and tapped the screen. A video began to play. It was Mark, standing on a stage at a fundraising gala, wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than my car. He looked handsome. He looked sincere. "My mother was a night nurse," Mark said in the video, his voice cracking with practiced emotion. "She worked herself to the bone to give me a chance. I watched her sacrifice everything. That is why I built this fund. To give families like hers a future." I stared at the screen. My hands gripped the edge of Harold's desk so hard my knuckles turned white. He was selling my poverty. He was packaging my 30 years of night shifts, my swollen feet, and my loneliness into a shiny marketing pitch to steal money from strangers. And all the while, he was planning to throw the real woman behind the story into a nursing home to save a few dollars. "It is a lie," I whispered. "He never cared about my sacrifice. He was ashamed of it." "It is worse than a lie," Lydia said, pausing the video. "It is a Ponzi scheme. He is moving money from the new investors to pay off the returns for the old ones. He is cycling cash between his company accounts and his personal accounts to maintain the lifestyle you see in Cedar Crest. And here is the kicker. Eleanor. He took out a second line of credit using your home address as collateral 2 months ago. He listed it as a family asset under his management. I felt the blood drain from my face. He mortgaged my house again. He leveraged his interest in it. Harold corrected, his voice dark. He is gambling with the roof over your head to keep his house of cards standing. Harold stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the grey winter street. If we sue him in civil court for the house, it will take months. He will drag it out. He will hide assets. But this, he pointed to the tablet. This is securities fraud. This is commingling of funds. This is a felony. He turned back to me. We don't just file a lawsuit. Eleanor. We build a dossier for the State Securities Board and the Financial Crimes Division. We prepare it, and we drop it on the same day you confront him. We spent the next 4 hours working in silence. I dug through my old bank statements, finding the transfers I had made to him over the years, proving that his self-made narrative was false. We found emails where he had pressured me to add his name to the deed, claiming it was for administrative safety, not investment purposes. Every document was a brick in the wall we were building around him. At 5 o'clock, Lydia found one last thing. She looked up from her laptop, her expression grim. He is in talks with a private lender, she said quietly. He is negotiating to sell his 50% stake in your house for a quick cash injection of $150,000. The closing date is set for January 2nd. If that goes through, you won't own your home with your son anymore. You will own it with a predatory bank that will force a sale immediately. The room went silent. The betrayal was absolute. He wasn't just waiting for me to die. He was actively selling me out while I was still making him coffee. Harold gathered the stack of evidence, the bank statements, the transcripts of the video, the loan documents, the email calling me a liability. He squared the edges of the papers on the desk and looked at me. His eyes were serious, searching for any sign of hesitation. Eleanor, he said gently, I need you to understand what we are doing. We aren't just getting your house back. If we give this to the authorities, Mark goes to prison. He loses his license. He loses his reputation. He loses everything. Are you sure you want to do this to your own son? I looked at the file. I thought about the grandson I knitted socks for. I thought about the night shifts I worked while Mark slept safely in his bed. Then I thought about the cold, calculated way he had texted me to stay away from Christmas dinner because I was no longer useful. I am not pushing him into a cell. Harold, I said, my voice steady and clear. He built the cell himself, brick by brick. I am just opening the door so the truth can walk in. Harold nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. He placed his hand on the thick file of evidence. All right then, Harold said. Just give me the nod. And this Christmas will be the last one your son spends as a free man. The town of Maple Ridge was trying its best to look festive. Strings of white lights draped over Main Street, and the smell of roasting chestnuts actually wafted from a vendor near the pharmacy. I stood in the aisle of the hardware store, fingering a box of silver tinsel. It seemed foolish to spend $12 on decorations for a house that might not be mine in a month. But I bought them anyway. I would not let Mark strip the spirit out of these walls before he stripped the paint. When I got home, Patrick, the widower next door who always shoveled my driveway without asking, caught me at the mailbox. He was holding a tin of cookies and looked uncomfortable in his thick wool coat. Eleanor, he said, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. I made too much roast for just me. Why don't you come over for Christmas dinner tomorrow? My daughter isn't making it down this year, and, well, it would be nice. It was a kind offer, a safe offer. A normal grandmother would have accepted it, grateful to not be alone. But safety was not on my agenda this year. Thank you, Patrick, I said, forcing a soft smile. But I have a plan this year. I have to do this myself. I went inside and sat at the kitchen table to write cards for Oliver and Emma. I kept the ink blue and the sentiment light. Grandma loves you. Be good. I did not mention their parents. I did not mention the war that was about to start. I mailed them early. I wanted my love to arrive separately from my wrath. My computer pinged. It was an email from Harold, attached with a draft of the formal complaint. The distribution list was terrifying. The State Securities Board, the District Attorney, the Financial Crimes Division. All I had to do was give the signal. Harold had added a note in all caps. Stay calm. Do not engage emotionally. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, practicing the mask I would wear. I looked at the lines around my mouth and forced them to relax. I am fine. Mark. I told my reflection. Congratulations on the new car. Let my lawyer handle that. I repeated the phrases until they tasted like ash in my mouth. No more apologies. No more explaining. I had to be a stone. Then, the phone rang. It was him. Mark. His voice was coated in a syrup of fake concern that made my stomach turn. Hey, Mum, he said. Just checking in. Hope you aren't too lonely over there. He did not wait for an answer before pivoting to the real reason he called. Listen, after the holidays, we really should talk about the house. The market is peaking. And, well, selling might be best for your retirement. It would be simpler for you. I gripped the phone, my knuckles turning white. I wanted to scream that I knew about his debts, about the nursing home in Brook Hollow, about the fraud. Instead, I made my voice sound frail and confused, playing the part he had written for me. Oh, I don't know. Mark, I am just so tired. We can talk later. Sure. Mum, he said, sounding relieved that the obstacle remained soft and pliable. Rest up. I hung up and immediately transcribed his words into the notebook for Harold. It was proof he was coercing me. Then came the final task. I pulled out the gifts I had wrapped days ago, the restored pocket watch for Mark, the vintage wine for Sophie. I carefully peeled back the tape. I took out the loving cards I had originally written. In their place, I slid in white envelopes. Inside Sophie's envelope was a copy of her email calling me a liability. Inside Mark's was a photocopy of the bank transfer for his wedding and a printed screenshot of his text banning me from dinner. I taped the paper back down. The packages looked innocent. They looked like love. They were actually subpoenas wrapped in red bows. It was Christmas Eve. The house was quiet, smelling faintly of the gingerbread I had baked out of habit. I sat in the dark kitchen, remembering the years when this room was loud with laughter, when Mark was a boy who needed me. That boy was gone. The man who replaced him had killed him. Church bells began to toll midnight in the distance, ringing out across the frozen town. I opened the junk drawer and curled my fingers around the cold metal of my car keys. This Christmas, I am coming to your house. Mark. I whispered to the darkness. But I am not coming the way you think. The drive to Cedar Crest on December 24th felt like crossing a border into a foreign country. My 10-year-old sedan rattled against the smooth pavement of the private driveways, looking like a rusted beetle amidst a parade of thoroughbreds. I parked down the street, not wanting to give Mark an excuse to say I had ruined the aesthetic of his driveway. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My wool coat was old, but I had steamed it until the lapels were razor sharp. My hair was neat. I picked up the gift basket, took a deep breath of the freezing air, and walked to the front door. A young man in a white server's jacket answered the bell. He held a clipboard and looked at me with polite confusion. "Name?" he asked, his pen hovering over the list. "Eleanor Price," I said. "I am Mark's mother." He scanned the list. His finger went down, then up, then stopped. He looked at me, then back at the paper. "I am sorry, ma'am," he said, lowering his voice. "You aren't on the list." "I am sure it is just an oversight," I said, smiling the way one smiles at a slow child. "And it is 5 degrees below zero out here." He hesitated, looking at my grey hair and the heavy basket in my hand. Decency won over protocol. He stepped aside. "Right this way, ma'am." The warmth of the house hit me first, followed by the smell of expensive pine and champagne. The living room was crowded with people who looked like they had stepped out of a magazine. Crystal glasses clinked, and laughter rippled through the air. In the center of the room, standing by the roaring fireplace, was Mark. He was holding a glass of scotch, gesturing expansively to a circle of rapt listeners. "My mother was a saint," I heard him say, his voice thick with performed emotion. "She worked double shifts at a clinic just to keep the lights on. That struggle, that is what drives me. That is why I built Green Horizon." He turned to gesture to the room, perhaps to emphasize the distance he had traveled, and his eyes landed on me. The smile froze on his face. It did not fade. It shattered. For a second, he looked terrified. Then, his eyes narrowed into slits of pure fury. He crossed the room in 4 long strides, grabbing my elbow with a grip that was painful enough to leave a bruise. He steered me forcefully toward the kitchen, away from the guests. "Mum," he hissed, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "What are you doing here? I told you don't come. Did you not get my text? Do you want to ruin everything?" I pulled my arm from his grip and smoothed my sleeve. "I am just here to drop off gifts for the grandchildren. Mark, I wouldn't dream of staying for dinner." Sophie appeared at his side instantly, a glass of white wine in her hand. Her smile was tight, her eyes cold. "Eleanor," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Really, this isn't a good time. Our guests are very high profile. They don't know how to handle, well, your energy. It is best if you leave." "My energy?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "Drama," she whispered, leaning in. "You bring drama." Before they could herd me out the back door like a stray dog, a squeal erupted from the hallway. "Grandma, you came?" Oliver and Emma barreled into the kitchen, slamming into my legs. I dropped to my knees to hug them, burying my face in their necks. The commotion drew attention. The guests in the living room turned. The perfect tableau of the wealthy couple was suddenly interrupted by the reality of the old woman on the floor. A woman in a velvet dress stepped forward. I recognized her from the dossier Lydia had compiled. Miranda, 55 years old, a major investor. "Is this the mother?" Miranda asked, her face lighting up. She walked over and extended a hand to me. "I have heard so much about you. Mark talks about your sacrifices in every speech. She pulled me gently toward the center of the room. Mark and Sophie followed, their smiles plastered on like masks that were slipping. "It is an honor," Miranda said to the room, "to meet the woman who made our genius host possible." I stood there, holding my gift basket, looking at the sea of expectant faces. I looked at Mark. He was sweating. "Thank you," I said softly. Then, I turned to my son. Mark is very generous with his praise. "Mark, did you tell them about who paid off the $50,000 for the wedding and the down payment for this house using her nurse's pension?" The silence that fell over the room was absolute. The clinking of glasses stopped. The fire crackled loudly in the hearth. Mark let out a nervous, jagged laugh. "Oh, Mom, you know how you get confused with the numbers. That is a private family story." "Is it?" Miranda asked, her brow furrowing. "I thought you said you built everything from zero, that you were self-made." "I am," Mark stammered. "I mean, obviously, family helps. But—" I turned to the grandchildren. "Here, my loves. These are for you." I handed them the socks and the toys. Then I turned to Sophie, who was standing frozen, her face pale. I held out the last gift basket. "And this is for you and Mark," I said. "Merry Christmas." Sophie snatched the basket, perhaps hoping to get me out the door faster. Her fingers fumbled with the ribbon. She pulled out the envelope that was sitting on top of the vintage wine. She tore it open, likely expecting a check or a card. I watched her eyes scan the first page. It was the photocopy of the mortgage document I had signed to fund their wedding. Behind it was the text message from Mark. "Don't come to Christmas dinner." Sophie's face went from a flush of embarrassment to the color of old paper. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at me, then at the investors watching her, and I saw the moment she realized that the house of cards had just caught fire. While Sophie stared at the mortgage deed, her mouth slightly open like a fish gasping for air. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was the signal. I stepped back toward the shadow of the staircase, away from the chandelier's glare. My thumb hovered over the email draft I had saved 3 days ago. The recipients included the State Securities Board, the Financial Crimes Division, and 2 investigative journalists Lydia knew personally. I took a breath that tasted of pine and betrayal, and I pressed send. Across the room, Lydia, posing as a friend of a potential investor, was holding her phone up. To anyone else, it looked like she was taking a festive video of the party. I knew she was recording Mark's face as the walls began to close in. Mark saw Sophie's pale expression and realized the energy in the room had shifted. He tapped his spoon against his champagne glass, the sharp ding, 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 cutting through the murmurs. "Everyone, please," Mark said, his smile stretching too wide, showing too many teeth. "Let's not get bogged down in old stories. Tonight is about family. It is about the unconditional love that binds us, even when things get complicated. My mother is here, and yes, she has always supported us, sometimes in ways that are hard to explain." He looked at me, his eyes pleading for me to play the part of the silent, nodding matriarch one last time. I did not nod. I stepped forward. "There are some kinds of support that make a person feel like a burden." "Mark," I said, my voice calm but carrying clearly across the silent room. "And there are moral debts that are never paid. until a text message arrives saying that the woman who paid for the wedding is not welcome at the Christmas dinner. A man in a charcoal suit, who I recognized as a corporate attorney for one of the local banks, set his drink down. He looked from me to Sophie, who was still clutching the mortgage papers. "Wait a minute," the attorney said, his voice sharp. "Sophie, are those loan documents? Is the primary residence still co-owned by a third party? Mark told us this property was fully capitalized by the fund." Sophie stammered, clutching the basket. I don't know. It is complicated." "It isn't complicated," I said. "I own 50% of this house, and I am currently paying the interest on the loan used to throw this party." Mark's phone began to vibrate on the mantelpiece. Then it chimed. Then it buzzed again. A relentless, jarring rhythm. He glanced at the screen. I watched the color drain from his face as he read the preview of a text from his business partner, "Bro, what is up with the complaint at the SEC? My lawyer just called." Mark wiped a sheen of sweat from his forehead. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw true fear in his eyes, but he tried to brazen it out. "Excuse us," Mark said to the room, his voice cracking. "My mother she is confused. Old age. We need a moment." He grabbed my arm, harder this time, and practically dragged me into his study, slamming the heavy oak door behind us. The noise of the party vanished, replaced by the sound of his heavy breathing. He spun around, his face twisted into a snarl I barely recognized. "Are you insane?" he screamed, slamming his hand onto his desk. "Do you have any idea what you are doing? You are killing my career. You are killing this family because of your ego. Because I didn't invite you to one dinner. It wasn't just a dinner." "Mark," I replied, standing by the door, my hand still on the brass knob. "It was an eviction notice. I will cut you off." He spat, advancing on me. "You will never see Oliver or Emma again. I will make sure you die alone in that house. I will sue you for everything you have." I looked at him, and I felt nothing. No fear, no love, just a profound, quiet pity. "You already cut me off." "Mark," I said, "you sent that text. You made that choice. And as for your career, I didn't kill it. The securities board, the investors, and the fraud investigators will decide that. Not me." I opened the door. "Where are you going?" he shouted, desperation creeping into his rage. "Mum." Wait, I walked out. I walked past the stunned guests who were now checking their phones, reading the breaking news about Northbridge equity that was starting to trickle onto local business forums. I walked past Miranda, who was frantically typing a message to her broker. I walked past Sophie, who was sitting on a velvet ottoman, weeping silently into the vintage wine I had bought her. As I stepped out into the biting cold of the front porch, the sound of the party behind me had died. In its place, rising from the valley below, came the wailing siren of police cruisers and state vehicles winding their way up the hill toward Cedar Crest. The storm had arrived. 3 weeks after the Christmas party that ended in sirens, I sat on a hard wooden bench in the county courthouse. Mark sat at the defendant's table, but the arrogance that usually fit him like a tailored suit was gone. He looked grey. His hands, usually so steady when holding a champagne glass, were fidgeting with the cuff of his shirt. He was facing a civil hearing regarding the ownership of my home, and looming behind, that was the much darker shadow of the Securities and Exchange Commission investigation. Mark's lawyer, a man with slicked-back hair and a voice like oiled gravel, tried to paint a picture of a benevolent son. "Your Honor," the lawyer said, gesturing vaguely toward Mark. Mr. Price filed the petition to sell the property solely for his mother's best interest. The term liability used in the emails was merely technical financial language. It was not an insult. And the text message regarding Christmas that was simply an attempt to set healthy boundaries for a nuclear family. Harold Grant stood up. He did not pace. He did not shout. He simply laid the evidence on the judge's bench like a royal flush in a poker game. Healthy boundaries do not involve secretly planning to put your mother in a budget nursing home in Brook Hollow, Harold said, his voice cutting through the room. And they certainly do not involve leveraging her home as collateral for high-risk loans without her consent. Mark Price used his mother's poverty as a marketing story to get rich, and then he tried to evict her when she became inconvenient. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, who looked like she had seen every variety of family rot imaginable, turned to me. "Mrs. Price," she said softly. "Do you have anything to add?" I stood up. My legs felt strong. I did not need the table for support. I pulled out my phone. The screen cracked from where I had dropped it in the kitchen days ago, and I found the message. "I don't have a legal argument." "Your Honor?" I said. "I just have the text my son sent me on December 23rd. I read it aloud, my voice ringing in the high-ceilinged room. "Mum, you paid for our wedding, but don't come to Christmas dinner. Sophie and I agreed it is just for immediate family now. Please respect that." A murmur went through the gallery. People shook their heads. I looked directly at Mark. He refused to meet my eyes. "My son is right about one thing," I continued, lowering the phone. "I did pay for his wedding. I paid for it with my retirement. I paid for it with my security. But he forgot that there are bills that come due much later than the wedding night. And today is the day he has to pay the tab." The judge didn't hesitate. She banged the gavel with a sound that felt like a door slamming shut on my past. "The court finds that Mr. Price abused his fiduciary duty," she ruled. "The co-ownership agreement is voided due to fraud and undue influence. Full title is reverted to Eleanor Price immediately. Furthermore, all assets belonging to Mr. Price are frozen pending the conclusion of the federal investigation." It was over. In the hallway outside, the air was thick with the smell of floor wax and despair. Mark was waiting for me. He looked frantic now, the reality of his ruin settling in. He stepped in front of me, blocking my path to the exit. "Mum, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "You have to withdraw the complaint with the state. You are destroying me. You are destroying us. How can you do this? You are tearing this family apart with your bare hands." I looked at him. I looked at the man I had raised, the man I had sacrificed everything for, and realized I was finally free of him. I didn't tear the family apart. "Mark," I said quietly. "The family broke the moment you hit send on that text message. I just swept up the pieces." I walked past him and out into the winter sunlight. 1 year later, it was Christmas Eve again. The snow was falling softly outside the window of my bungalow in Maple Ridge. The house was warm, smelling of roast turkey and cinnamon. But this time, the table was not set for ghosts. It was set for Harold, for Lydia, for my neighbour Patrick, and for Oliver and Emma, who were staying with me for the weekend while Sophie dealt with her own legal battles. I sat at the head of the table, watching my granddaughter laugh as she tried to balance a spoon on her nose. I felt a vibration in my pocket. I pulled out my phone. It was the old screenshot of Mark's text. I had kept it for a year as a reminder of my strength. I looked at the words one last time. Don't come to Christmas dinner. I smiled. I pressed delete. I placed the phone face down on the table and looked around at the faces of the people who actually respected me. Merry Christmas, everyone. I whispered. I am finally home. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let's chat about what you would have done in Eleanor's shoes. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, hit that like button, and smash the hype button so we can share this journey with even more people.